A jarring revelation has emerged, potentially shifting the entire trajectory of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. A veteran bureau agent is publicly questioning why world-class search teams are being turned away. Combine that with a former agent's insight that the cuffs are likely closer than the media assumes. Every major highway from Arizona to California is plastered with his face. The switchboards at the bureau are lit up. Walls are closing in not just on the primary suspect, but on his inner circle. These hunts do not usually end in a hail of bullets. They end with a single informant deciding that protecting a monster is no longer worth the federal heat. Local authorities in Pima County maintain that this remains a high-priority operation. The hunt persists until the victim is recovered, or every single thread of evidence is burned out. Every lead. Not most, all of them. It is a fundamental truth in this business, one that veterans like Coffindaffer internalize. It is the same grim hope that sustained families in the Kohberger case and keeps the Guthries standing today. In this line of work, the dead silence is usually the precursor to the walls finally crashing down. The file is not closed. The trail has not gone cold. To the shadow who took her, the timer is counting down. These crews have successfully recovered the lost from flood zones, dense timber, and unforgiving desert landscapes. The intelligence keeps flowing. The trackers are never going to quit. If you hold a piece of this puzzle, dial 1-800-CALL-FBI immediately. Log on to tips.fbi.gov or reach out to 88 Crime. Be vigilant. Stay alert for the next briefing. Dismissed. The United Cajun Navy presented Sheriff Chris Nanos with a complete tactical search plan but never received a single response. Coffindaffer is demanding an explanation for that silence. Tonight, we peel back the layers of that very question. I am your lead on this briefing, and we are dissecting every known variable in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. We are examining the physical evidence, the behavioral profiles, the tactical signals, and the likely endgame. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the familiar co-anchor of National Broadcasting Company's Today Show. Her residence sits in the serene, affluent reaches of the Catalina Foothills, overlooking Tucson, Arizona. It is the sort of enclave where neighbors share pleasantries, the exact place where the unthinkable is never supposed to take root. Nancy was last seen at home on the night of January 31st. By the following morning, she was missing, and the red flags were immediate. A recent transmission on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, stopped many in their tracks. This wasn't some baseless rumor from a gossip feed. This wasn't a case of a confused senior wandering off. The scene itself whispered a much darker narrative of forced departure. Investigators confirmed the grim reality. Blood evidence was discovered right on her front porch. This was an abduction. From the initial hours of her disappearance, officials raised alarms regarding her physical state as Nancy relies on critical daily medication. The countdown started on day 1, and it is still ticking. Revisit Coffindaffer's statement, because there is a tactical nuance buried in those words that the public largely overlooked. In high-stakes disappearances, experienced civilian recovery units are typically the first assets a smart agency activates. Groups like Texas EquuSearch and the United Cajun Navy bring decades of expertise to the table, along with specialized technical gear. They offer boots on the ground and established logistics. Rejecting them is illogical, unless, of course, you are no longer searching. That is the precise point Coffindaffer was trying to hammer home. She suggested that sidelining these experts only happens when the police are on the precipice of a major break and no longer require external eyes. It wasn't a wild theory born on a Reddit thread or speculation from a keyboard warrior with zero access to the truth. Analyze the implications of that shift in posture. If you are still hunting for a needle in a haystack, you want every available person looking. You maximize your resources. But when the focus shifts from finding a person to building a criminal prosecution, outsiders become a liability rather than an asset. Civilians can inadvertently contaminate a tight operation. Coffindaffer described her outlook as glass half full. She is banking on the idea that law enforcement is closing the net. That isn't just blind optimism. That's a seasoned agent reading the behavioral patterns of the department and spotting a positive trend. And the data supports this. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos informed National Broadcasting Company News that his team is narrowing the gap on the suspect captured on video. Definitely closer. Those aren't the words of a frustrated investigator staring at a cold case file. That is the calculated phrasing of someone holding a winning hand but keeping their cards close to their chest. Let's break down the current evidence locker, because this is where the forensic psychology of the case truly begins to shine. These words were authored by Jennifer Coffindaffer, a retired special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Consider the digital breadcrumbs. On February 10th, the Bureau made public a doorbell camera clip featuring a man in a full face mask. He wore heavy trousers, a jacket, gloves, and a visible firearm holster as he prowled Nancy's porch on the night she vanished. The Bureau eventually upgraded his status to a prime suspect. But here is the critical detail. Masks can't hide everything. This individual left behind physiological signatures, specifically prominent eyebrows peeking above the fabric. There was the shadow of a dark mustache and, more importantly, a distinct ring worn on his pinky finger. Never overlook the jewelry. Rings are deeply personal, often unique markers that can link a shadow to a name. These are the specific markers that a close associate would identify instantly. They are exactly the kind of breadcrumbs our team and the public must isolate. The pack. Bureau Intel confirms the subject carried a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker model, a backpack distributed exclusively through Walmart. You might wonder, how does a common retail bag move the needle in a federal investigation? Look at it through a forensic lens. That retailer maintains one of the most sophisticated global surveillance infrastructures in the world. She spent decades within the Bureau building cases and dissecting crime scenes with clinical precision. Our investigators explored the digital trail, specifically the possibility that this pack was acquired through an online transaction, brick and mortar or digital. A footprint remains. There is a transaction log, a digital trail, perhaps a face captured on a high-definition lens. Every object has a biography. We are tugging at every loose fiber of this case, starting with the recovered genetic material. This is where the profile becomes complex. DNA on dark gloves found 2 miles from the Guthrie residence led to a restaurant worker, an unrelated party, a procedural ghost, but a necessary one. Elimination is the primary tool used to tighten the perimeter around the actual subject. Pima County officials confirm they are still scrubbing forensic data, ranging from laboratory samples to every frame of recovered surveillance video. Then we have the contaminated genetic profiles recovered from deep within the Guthrie residence itself. Sheriff Nanos admitted the difficulty in isolating the foreign genetic cocktail found on-site DNA, not belonging to the victim or her immediate circle. Deciphering mixed DNA is a significant hurdle, but it is far from an unbreakable wall for our forensics team. She understands the internal mechanics of a manhunt. Her question was deceptively brief, yet psychologically devastating. This is especially true when we fuse that data with the power of investigative genetic genealogy. It is a method that has resurrected ghosts from decades-old cold cases. The motive. Nanos told NBC News that investigators have identified the why. The official kept his cards hidden, but veteran analysts like Coffindaffer immediately recognized the hand he was playing. She noted to Newsweek that the admission of a motive is a massive shift in the investigation's momentum. Identifying the why inevitably points to the who. And what was the primary theory our teams focused on since day one? Coffindaffer points directly to abduction for financial gain, a kidnapping for ransom. That was the central pillar. It explains the family's public desperation and why Savannah Guthrie begged on camera for a sign of life. It is why she stated publicly, "We will pay." This was no random act. The subject had a calculated plan. This was surgical. Sheriff Nanos believes the offender had a specific reason, making this a high-value, targeted strike. Let us follow the money. In a high-stakes investigation like this, capital is the ultimate catalyst for a break. Why does Sheriff Nanos continue to sideline elite civilian search units like Texas EquuSearch and the United Cajun Navy? Savannah Guthrie announced a $1 million bounty for any intel leading to her mother's safe recovery. Additionally, the Bureau is offering $100,000 for information leading to a successful arrest and conviction. 88 Crime has tacked on an additional $12,500 to the total. We are looking at over $1.2 million on the table. Jennifer Coffindaffer suggests this massive payout is how the suspect's circle crumbles. The primary way this case closes is when an associate decides to break their silence. A scorned partner, a relative with a sudden conscience, or someone who realizes 7 figures is worth more than their loyalty. That isn't just a theory. That is the cold, hard reality of criminal investigation. Most cases don't crack through scientific breakthroughs. They crack through the inherent frailty of the human psyche. Someone loses sleep or sees a payday and makes a choice. Now, the psychological pressure is reaching a boiling point. Currently, the investigation has gone dark. In our line of work, we recognize this very specific type of silence. Is law enforcement on the verge of making an arrest? It isn't the silence of a stalled case. It is the pressurized silence of a storm gathering strength. We stop briefing the media. Press conferences vanish. Every word released is carefully measured by a legal team. Civilians are signaled to stand down. Think back to the events of November 2022. 4 students in Moscow, Idaho, were eliminated in their own home. It was a crime that scarred the national consciousness. For weeks, the radio went dead. James Fry, the chief at the time, took intense heat for the perceived lack of progress. The public screamed for answers. Armchair detectives wanted in. Every expert had a theory to share, and law enforcement said almost nothing. Coffindaffer notes the parallels between the heat Nanos is taking and the Fry situation. But look at the final outcome of that tactical silence. While the public watched the void, investigators were quietly stacking bricks to build an airtight case against Brian Kohberger. Cellular data, genetic markers, and digital shadows. Approximately 6 weeks after the crime, the handcuffs clicked shut. Perhaps they already know Nancy's fate and don't want to squander these specialized assets. Read that sentence again, slowly. Silence isn't a failure of the system. It is the sound of an evidentiary trap being set, piece by methodical piece. Focus on the Nancy Guthrie file. The recovery teams are being recalled from the grid. The sheriff is measuring his words carefully. Meanwhile, the Bureau has moved the operation deep inside the wire. A veteran Fed with decades on the force is dropping signals on social media, suggesting a breakthrough. Coffindaffer herself noted that just because the public sees a vacuum, the reality is a flood of intelligence. The task force is processing more actionable data than any standard homicide file. That is a heavy assessment coming from a seasoned pro. Here is the tactical breakdown of our current position. We have an 84-year-old female extracted from her residence in what bears the hallmarks of a precision abduction for profit. The target is a masked male with distinct features, prominent brow lines, a dark mustache, and a pinky ring that serves as a signature. Forensic teams are tracking a retail history on a recovered bag. Genetic markers are under review. The psychological profile suggests a clear motive. The bounty has climbed to over $1,200,000.